Well, here we are with Eastman's latest release. This is their new tenor, the 52nd Street with DS mechanism. To quote Bob Mintzer in a text he sent me, he says, "It is a massive improvement over the 52nd Street tenors of old. Playing the prototype now, super inspiring." Now, that was a message he sent me in July of 2022, and we've moved on from the prototype to the actual production models. So in today's video, I'm going to drill into the details of this instrument, explain exactly what the DS mechanism is, and compare it with this model, the Rue St. you may remember. They released this several years ago, and this was the first saxophone to feature this DS mechanism. I'm also going to play test both necks that come with this instrument. Yes, this saxophone doesn't come with one neck, but two necks. So let's get stuck in. So their first iteration of this instrument came from their Taiwanese production, and it had a really warm reception by the public. And I'm sure this was helped along by the enthusiastic endorsement by Bob Mintzer. Now, several years later, Eastman moved away from their Taiwanese factory and they developed their own factory in China that allowed them to completely control the design and the manufacturing processes of their instrument. And they really kind of shook up the instrument from the ground upwards. So this was the Mark II version of the 52nd Street, which we still sell today. But the big news about today's announcement is this instrument here is that exact same horn that features lighter brass, harder and thinner brass, efficiencies in the keywork to make the whole instrument a bit lighter and more responsive. So it's got all of that, but in addition to that, it has this all new DS mechanism on it, which just changes the game another notch up. So what exactly is the DS mechanism? Okay, to help explain this, I need to tell you that Eastman, as the parent company, purchased a flute brand with a lot of history, 100 years of history, called Haynes. And Haynes have a head technician and key designer called David Shipani. And he has done some great work with this brand and designed some really intricate key work for their flutes and some sort of lateral thinking and parallel thinking on the part of Eastman. They utilized his skills and applied them to the saxophone. The left and right hand key stacks have essentially been made lighter and smoother thanks to the design alteration that involves positioning these regulation feet in a different spot to the norm, which actually changes the pivot point against this regulation bar. And it has this effect of making it really light and even and smooth and sort of buttery feeling under the fingers. And this involves the left hand stack and the right hand stack. Now, the way I see it is this is a really big deal because these are your front line notes. So this is a big deal. This changes the entire feel of the action of the instrument. So really fantastic stuff. Now, moving on to some of the other features, because we've got, if you look up and down the horn, there are amendments and adjustments everywhere. So with this octave key here, we see this sort of three-dimensional form taking place. It's much more sculpted than the usual octave key, and it really sits comfortably on my left-hand thumb there. They've made some adjustments to the sculpting and positioning of these palm keys as well, and it feels great under the fingers. The key touches is a real standout feature. I mean, apart from looking aesthetically fantastic, they actually have this nickel silver finish which feels great under the fingers. There's almost a slight grip there, so you don't feel like you're going to slide at all, and it's just a really nice tactile satisfying feeling under the fingers. On the side keys down here, we've got some different shaping going on. Again, it's this whole business of sculpting the keys to make them feel great on the fingers. and just more of an aesthetic thing here. But again, I think it is a weight-saving thing. They've got this lovely body to bell brace here, with this kind of cord style design. And then a really key thing for me, and I'm sure for most sax players out there, is this design with the table keys. It's a much shorter and narrower block than you might get on a conventional saxophone. And it's really easy to navigate these keys to move around. Again, you'll see this nickel silver on the G sharp, which gives it this grip. But on the C sharp, it's this big, thick kind of wodgy thing going on that allows you to slide from the G sharp to the C sharp nice and easily. And then at the same time, you can move from the C sharp onto the other table keys very easily. And all of the keys are very closely fitted to one another, allowing you to navigate easily, as I say. Okay, so talking about these innovations on the saxophone, really we come back to the main hinge point, which is this business of these tabs on the left and right hand stacks, and the fact that just through a simple change of structure of these parts here, we make this action lighter. And in practical terms, what difference does this make? Well, I'll demonstrate a little technical passage for you now, and then I'll explain to you how it feels to me in comparison to my experiences with other similar top-end saxophones. So my feeling there is that everything was even and smooth. I wasn't fighting the instrument. Sometimes with manufacturers, even highly esteemed manufacturers, you get great instruments, but you get heavy spots in the key action, whereby on certain notes you just have to press a little bit harder, and it takes a long time to get used to that. Whereas with this, everything is completely even all the way down. So it just makes playing technical passages like that a cinch and a real joy, in fact. Okay, so first of all, you heard the M neck for mincer, and then we have also the S neck. I'm glad they put the letters on here because they look exactly the same, and you could easily get these things modelled up. And my feelings overall are I prefer the sound on the M neck. I just find it a little bit more open and warm, sort of more overtones going on in general. And this, you can't really tell the difference just looking at them, but there will be a slightly different taper in the necks in each one. And I think ultimately, as players, you're going to decide which one is your favourite one, and I would doubt whether you would then switch necks. It tends to be one of these things when manufacturers do this, as nice as it is, whereby you do your play test comparison, you decide which one works for you, and you kind of stick to it, and the other one sits in the saxophone case. For me, they're both great, but the M just has the edge for me. Before jumping into the sound side of things, which is the key part of what I want to talk about now, I should just first of all say that as both of these instruments have this DS mechanism on it, I suppose it may be pretty obvious to you that my feeling under the fingers is identical from one horn to the other. I mean, they look quite different. We've got a gold shiny one there, and we've got this more rustic, unlacquered one here. But, you know, when you close your eyes and you've just got that feeling under your fingers, they both feel wonderful. So just to reiterate that point. So on to the main point now, and the reason for doing this comparison, we're dealing with two different bore types here. When the Rue St was introduced some years back, it was introduced as a contrast to the 52nd Street at the time, in that it had this slightly more focused and perhaps refined sound, if you want to describe it like that. And the 52nd Street had this kind of more American vintage sound, a bigger, bolder sound. I still get that feeling now with this new instrument. Perhaps I find that with the Mark II iteration of the 52nd Street, as it were, compared to the very early Taiwanese ones, that there is a little bit more focus in the sound, but it still has that basic kind of big American sort of spread thing. And my overriding feeling when thinking about the sound is excellent on both of them. And I actually had to go back and forth several times to really establish my feeling. When it comes down to it, I sort of feel like there's a little bit more interest in the sound on the 52nd Street model. Like I'm hearing more overtones, which just gives me something more to play with and something more to get into. So if I had to sort of vote for it, my personal preference is I'm loving this new 52nd Street with the DS mechanism, as much as I think the Rue St George is great and will have a different audience that will really appreciate it. But for me, this is an absolutely fantastic instrument, and I can see why Bob Mintzer is so made up with this new horn. So yeah, absolutely great instruments, and I thoroughly recommend that you come to our store and check these out if they are available, and if we have them, we will do our utmost best to make sure we have these in the store for you.